So, Joshua chapter 4. Today's message is entitled Memorial Moments. Memorial Moments. And I want to set the stage of that in this story in Joshua 4. And then we're actually going to go back to Exodus chapter 1 in just a moment. And that's going to be the main text that we're going to be in. But let's look first here in Joshua 4, beginning in verse 1. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, this is obviously when Joshua's taking the children of Israel into the promised land, crossing the Jordan River. So when the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priest stood, and to carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you will stay tonight." So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, "Go over before the ark of the Lord your God in the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. And when it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off, and these stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever." Here we see a memorial moment. The Jordan was at flood stage, but God miraculously stopped the flow of the Jordan so the people could cross over. And so he asked them or told them to erect this memorial out of these stones so that they could remember, be reminded of the faithfulness of God, and so they could tell their children about the faithfulness of God. This word memorial simply means a reminder. It's a remembrance. It commemorates something, so it's a way to honor and to worship and to celebrate what God has done. Back in the Old Testament, oftentimes when God would do something miraculous or there would be a very unique encounter with God, they might either erect an altar where they might worship or sacrifice, or in this case, they would set up a memorial. Obviously, God stopping the flow of the Jordan was a miraculous event, so God wanted them to remember that and tell their children that so they could honor and celebrate in an ongoing fashion. So Joshua 4 relates a memorial moment, if you will. All right? Well, this morning, I did not bring any stones in with me, but I did bring some cones in with me. We're used to seeing cones all over town, right? So this will just feel familiar. These cones represent different memorial moments in your life. Those times of celebration when God did something exciting in your life. So for example, this first cone could represent your salvation experience. When you gave your life to Christ at that moment, He forgave your sin, He cleansed you, He changed you, He gave you new life, He gives you a hope of heaven. So that's a memorial moment that you want to celebrate and never forget. That's one memorial moment. Another might be what God does in your life just throughout your life. For example, maybe God did something miraculous in your body and you experienced some great physical healing. Maybe your marriage was broken and you thought you were about to lose your marriage, but God did something and brought that marriage back. Maybe your children have been really wayward, but God's done the miraculous and brought them back to you. Maybe it's in your finance. It could be whatever. But God did something miraculous that you were able to celebrate, and so it's a marker of what God has done. Maybe a marker, this one might represent more like a corporate memorial, like what it is in the children of Israelites in Joshua. For me, it would be like maybe our church. As young as our church is, there's been several memorial moments in our church that we can celebrate. One big one is this building right here that we're worshiping in this morning, where a previous church had kingdom vision to say, we want this to continue to be used by God, and so through God's working, they gifted us this building. That's a memorial moment that we never want to forget. We want to remember what God has done. So these are memorials that we want to remember. Now, we don't set up probably literal stones or cones when God does something incredible in our life, but we should be putting that marker in our heart, in our spirit, so that we can remember and we can celebrate what God has done for us. So we can tell our children and our grandchildren what God has done in the past. So we have these memorial markers, if you will. Keep that in mind. And then now I want to invite you to turn back to Exodus chapter 1. In Exodus chapter 1, we do not see a memorial moment. Rather, we see what I'm going to call a mundane moment. Mundane, I don't mean negative. I just mean it's common, it's everyday, it's ordinary. It's just the routine of life. Exodus 1 gives us a mundane moment. It's actually a chapter of transition. At the end of Genesis, we see Joseph and his story. We remember his story. He's thrown in a cistern, then he's sold into slavery. He goes to Egypt. He serves under Potiphar's command for service for a period of time until he's taken to jail over a false accusation. While he's in prison, he interprets the dreams of some of Pharaoh's servants. Later, when the Pharaoh has a dream, he interprets that dream, and so he ends up second in command. So all of this happened so Joseph could be in a position to help save Israel. So this is a memorial moment. That's Genesis, in Genesis. Exodus chapter 2, Moses comes on the scene, and we know Moses' story as he rescues the Israelites from the bondage of Egypt. So the end of Genesis represents all of Joseph's story and the memorial moment there. Exodus chapter 2 represents this memorial moment that God uses Moses. So in between that is Exodus chapter 1. It's all the in-between time between those memorial moments. It's just what I'm going to call this period of transition. So it's just like you see here. We've got these cones that represent our memorial moments, but what about all the space in between? That's what we're calling the mundane moments this morning. So in Exodus chapter 1, I don't want to focus on the memorial moments, even though that's the sermon title. I want to spend our time this morning talking about the mundane moments. What do you do during the mundane moments? Probably for all of us, we could recount some of these memorial moments in our life when God did just some incredible things in our situation, in our circumstance. And so we know what to do there. We celebrate that. We rejoice in that. But what about the in-between seasons? What about all the mundane moments? What about all just those common, everyday, normal routine of life? Let me ask you a question. Have you ever felt like life is just mundane? You've got a schedule. You got to keep the schedule. You have life responsibilities. You've got to tend to all those responsibilities. You go to work. You try to do a good job. You take care of your children. You get them to all their places they need to be. You're sure they're taken care of. You have to tend to all the multiple chores that you have in life. You're paying your bills. You're doing whatever repair projects on all your property. You just have this routine of life. There's nothing that seems glamorous or eventful or memorial or memorable. It's just the day-to-day routine. The question is, what should you do in all of those days and in all of those moments? What we see in Exodus chapter 1 is the everyday life of the Israelites at that time. It represents the mundane, life in the trenches, everyday routine of life, but it gives us some insight as to how we should live in the midst of those mundane moments. So here's a short answer first. What do we do in all of those in-between times? You walk with Christ. That's the simple answer. That's the short answer. You walk with Christ. Last week we talked about the importance and the priority of fellowshipping with Christ. This is a very similar concept, that we are to walk with Christ. But Exodus chapter 1 gives us a couple of aspects of how we are to walk with Christ in the mundane and in the normal and in the routine of life. So here's the first one. What do you do in the mundane? You walk in faithfulness. You walk in faithfulness. Look in verse 6 here of Exodus. It says, "Now Joseph and all of his brothers and all that generation died. But the Israelites were fruitful and multiplied greatly and became exceedingly numerous, so that the land was filled with them." Here we see Joseph is mentioned here in Exodus, and part of that reason is because it's talking about the faithfulness of Joseph. It's indicating the faithfulness of Joseph's life. That even though he's died, the Israelites continue to grow and are numerous. Now, obviously, first and foremost, the Israelites are being blessed and growing because of the faithfulness of God and all that God is doing. And I also understand that when it talks about that they're growing, that it's talking first and foremost about just numerical growth. They showed up there with 70 initially, and then now over the years, it's countless numbers of people. But in this context, there's a spiritual truth as he gives us direction from Joseph. And the principle is this: faithfulness leads to fruitfulness. Your faithfulness to God always results in fruitfulness. So we want to walk in faithfulness. How? Well, number one, you want to walk faithfully in the everyday. We're talking about the mundane. So what we're seeing here is that we walk faithfully in the everyday. Your faithfulness in the everyday activities of your life is what's going to bear the greatest fruit in your life and going to have the greatest fruit of those around you. When I look at Joseph's story, we all know the memorial moments of Joseph's story. But as I look at Joseph's life, most of it was lived in the routine. Most of his life was lived in the mundane. He spent time first as a shepherd. So he's just always out there in the field with his flock, day after day after day after day. All he's doing is watching his flock. Then he goes and he serves under the household of Potiphar, and he's a servant. All he's doing day after day after day is doing whatever his master has told him to do, doing the chores that he's assigned to as the servant. Once he gets to Pharaoh's service, he just does his job every day. He's out there trying to collect grain and build buildings for the grain, and then trying to get the grain to those places. And when the famine hits, he's just trying to distribute all the grain to the people. He's just doing his job. It's all in the mundane. His faithfulness in the everyday, I think, is what is key. That's what speaks the loudest to me. And I think when Joseph was doing all of this, I don't think he was thinking, okay, I've got to do great things for God. I've got to do some incredible things for God. I've got to be used in this incredible way for God. All he's doing is being faithful in the everyday. And God's producing the fruitfulness. Oswald Chambers has a devotion book called My Utmost for His Highest. In the October 21st devotion, it said, "It is ingrained in us that we have to do exceptional things for God. But we do not. We have to be exceptional in the ordinary things of life, on the ordinary streets, among ordinary people. In other words, in the everyday, walk in faithfulness every single day." We all understand that with mountaintops, in between the mountaintops are valleys. Well, spiritually speaking, we know that in between all these memorial moments are going to be the mundane moments. But here's the truth. The real growth, the real deepening of your faith happens in the mundane moments of life. It doesn't happen in the memorial. It happens all the faithfulness in the routine, the faithfulness in every day. That's what produces fruit in your life. That's where grace is poured out the most. It's the mundane moments that God is using to not only grow you and produce fruit in you, but that you become fruitful as a testimony and a witness. Let me give you some examples. Your faithfulness in simply raising your children in the church, raising your children to know Christ, to love Christ, to follow Christ, teaching them the Word, teaching them how to pray, just day after day, week after week, month after month, as you pour into the life of your children, that is what's going to produce the greatest fruit in their life. Your faithfulness in the workplace. You're following Christ, you're going to work, you're doing your job, but you've got the Holy Spirit and you're full of the Spirit and you love Jesus and you're glowing, you're a light, you're the salt. And so when you're in this work environment and you're just shining your light, you're just loving Jesus, your coworkers see that. And they're drawn to Christ because of the testimony day in and day out and week in and week out that you're just following Christ. They see that and it makes an impact in their life. Those day-to-day opportunities where you can resist temptation. Just every day when you face the temptations, and you're saying, no, nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows you're facing those things. Nobody would know if you did whatever. But just in your faithfulness to follow Christ and walk in faithfulness, you're saying no. That's what continues to build your strength to resist temptation more and more. Us as a church, as we come together corporately, you know, we all love those moments when the Spirit just falls, you know, and you just have those incredible times when it's like, oh my goodness, what has happened? We love those experiences. But oftentimes it's what we would consider the normal routine of church. And we could say, well, man, we just had a normal service. Yeah, but when you pull normal services week after week after week, month after month after month, year after year after year, that's when God begins to really change things. Week after week, you're teaching children about Christ. Week after week, you're teaching the youth about Christ. We're coming together to honor Christ, to have community. It's the routine of life that produces the greatest fruitfulness. What I'm saying is, your constant, steady, daily walk with Christ, that's what yields fruit in your life. That's what impacts those around you. So, walk in faithfulness in the mundane. Be faithful in the everyday. Secondly, though, be faithful in the hard days. Be faithful in the hard days. Look at verse 8. Excuse me, I'm trying to find verse 8. Here we go. Verse 8 says, Then a new king, who did not know about Joseph, came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become much too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies and fight against us and leave the country. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor. And they built Pithom and Ramesses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. Verse 8, you read those first 4 words, it says, then a new king. You don't even have to read anything else. You know what's coming next is not good. It's going to be bad. Then a new king. It's like, okay, you go to work and then a new boss. They don't know you. They don't know your accomplishments. They don't know your value to the team. They don't have you. And it's like, oh no, what's going on? This is a bad phrase, then a new king, because this king is an ungodly king. He does not like the Hebrews. And so he makes life hard for the Israelites. Verse 10 says, come, we must deal shrewdly with them. And he does. He develops a strategy that he thinks is going to weaken them. He oppresses them with forced labor, but to his surprise, the oppression does not weaken them. It actually strengthens them. They grow stronger. Verse 12 says, in fact, the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. Now, again, I know this is speaking first to the numerical growth that the Israelites are having. But I think it's giving us a spiritual truth, a spiritual principle, a spiritual reality, and that's this, that greater opposition leads to greater growth. Oppression does not stop God's people. Oppression elevates, it motivates God's people. Today, in those places in the world who are suffering the greatest oppression for Christianity are the same places that are experiencing the greatest growth of Christianity. It promotes this truth that the greater the consequences for following Christ, it seems it develops a greater commitment to follow Christ. Struggle brings strength, and tested faith brings true faith. And that's what we're talking about, is being faithful even in the hard days. The spiritual truth is, I think, the more the enemy tries to stifle God's work and God's people, the more he actually stokes God's work and God's people. When you look at the story of Joseph, you remember his brothers are, the ones that kind of started all this when they sold him into slavery. So years later, he's reunited with his brothers once the famine hits, and brothers realize, okay, this is Joseph who we did bad to. So in Genesis chapter 50, in verse 20, when Joseph has the opportunity to talk to his brothers, he says this to them, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. You meant harm for me, but God used it for good. And here's the truth. We've got all these memorial moments that we have periodically in our life. But you will face hard days in between those memorial moments. So when you face those hard days, what do? You continue to walk in faithfulness. Now maybe today, maybe you're in a valley. You're not on the mountaintop today. Maybe you're looking at a flooded river rather than a dry one that you can cross. Maybe for you this morning, life is just pretty hard. You're working, you're trying to make ends meet, you're trying to adapt to a higher cost of living, you're trying to be a great parent, you're trying to be a great spouse, you're trying to raise your children well, you're trying to do your job well, you're trying to do all the things that you need to do, but if you're really honest, you're just saying, man, life is a real struggle for me right now. If that's you, what do? Be faithful. Continue to walk in faithfulness, even in the hard days, because it's in those days, as you continue to walk faithful, that God is going to do a work in you. He's going to give you more strength. He's going to give you more wisdom. He's going to let you experience more grace. You're going to experience more of His presence, and that's going to build even more determination to continue to walk faithfully with Him. The truth is, God is very present with you in the hard days. He's going to use those hard days to do something amazing in your life. If you look at the story of Exodus 1, when they're in the midst of hard days, those are the preimpetus for the memorial moment that's about to come. And that's what happens a lot of times as we go through hard days. It's preparation, and you just wait, because God's fixing to do something memorial in your life. The truth is, what the enemy means for evil in your life, God does and will use for good. Let me just throw out a few verses. You can hear them, you can see them. Just for encouragement, to know that you can be faithful in the hard days because God is going to be faithful to you. 2 Corinthians 4:17 says, "For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all." 1 Peter 5:10, "And the God of all grace, who called you to His eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, will Himself restore you." Psalm 34:19, "The righteous person may have many troubles, but the Lord delivers him from them all." Isaiah 43:2, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned." John 16:33, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, because I have overcome the world." Luke 22:31 and 32, "Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat, but I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail." Here's the point. What does it mean to walk with Christ? It means to walk with Him faithfully. Walk in faithfulness. Walk in faithfulness in all the mundane, routine days of life. Walk with Him faithfully in the everyday and in the hard days. Why? Because it will produce fruit. It's in your faithfulness, in your everyday faithfulness in the mundane, that leads to abundant fruitfulness in your life. So secondly, walk in faithfulness, but secondly, as you walk with Christ, walk in fear. Walk in fear. Look in verse 15. It says that the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, "When you help the Hebrew women in childbirth and observe them on the delivery stool, if it is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, let her live." The midwives, however, feared God, and they did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Here are these midwives. They're given a direct command from the king. Execute whatever boys that are born to the Hebrews. They knew what they were commanded to do. They knew the consequences of what would happen if they did not do what the kings would do or said do. But in verse 17 it says, "But the midwives feared God." That word fear means to reverence, to honor, to respect. It means to be in awe of God. So they considered God awesome. And in verse 17 it said so awesome that they did not do what the king of Egypt told them to do. They feared God over fearing the Pharaoh. They decided to do what God said instead of what the king said. They decided to do what was right rather than do what was safe. Why would they do that? Well, here's a second truth, and that is that fear leads to favor. Okay, your faithfulness leads to fruitfulness, but your fear is going to lead to favor. Your fear of the Lord, fear in the Lord, is going to lead to favor. These midwives were not in the midst of a memorial moment. They were in the midst of the everyday routine of life. In fact, they were in the midst of hard days, but they're just doing their job day in and day out. But in the everyday of their life, they understood the awesomeness of God. And so they approached every single day, even the hard days, in this sense of reverence and awe and fear. They made a choice to honor God even in the mundane. We've got a choice. We can choose to give in to the fear of man, or we can choose to fear the Lord. We can choose to give in to the pressure of the world, or we can say, no, I'm going to stay true to my faith with God, and I'm going to choose to walk with Him. And walking in fear is simply in every decision, every day, you do what is right, not what's easy. You do what's right, not what is safe. The idea is that living every single day, understanding and proclaiming the awesomeness of God, that's when God does some incredible things in our life. So even when you're in those moments that don't scream out, God is awesome, you still understand deep in your heart that God is awesome. And so you're going to walk in fear. It leads to favor. Look in verse 20. Remember, the midwives feared God. They wouldn't do what the king said. So in verse 20 it says, so God was kind to the midwives. And the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, He gave them families of their own. The midwives feared God, so God honored that. He blessed that, and He was kind to them. That word kind just means to make successful, to cause to prosper. God was pleased with them, and so He blessed them. The fear of God led to the favor of God in their life, and they were blessed because of their willingness to walk in fear in the everyday, in the hard days, in the mundane times of life. Now here's a side note. Doing what is right instead of what's easy or safe, that does not always guarantee or eliminate immediate negative consequences. For example, if you go to work tomorrow and you have a new boss, or you have the old boss, and the boss asks you or demands or commands you to do something that you know is immoral, unethical, it goes against your beliefs, it goes against the way you follow Christ, you're not going to do it, and so you tell your boss, I'm not doing that. You may very well be fired right there on the spot. So doing what's right does not always eliminate the immediate consequences. Short term, you may endure hardship. But when you do what's right, in the long term, you will always enjoy and experience God's favor. Because God blesses those who will walk in fear. He blesses all that you do. So what does that mean? It means you honor God. You walk faithfully in the everyday. You honor God. You honor God every day. You honor God in every decision. You honor God in every situation. You honor God in every activity. You honor God in every conversation that you have. You honor God in every aspect of every mundane moment. And if you will do that, and when you do that, God blesses you and you experience favor. Here's really the point of the message. You're going to experience the memorial moments in life when God does the incredible, and you're going to celebrate and you're going to rejoice, and we thank God for the memorial moments. We love those memorial moments. But most of your life's going to be lived in the mundane moments. So the encouragement is walk with Christ in those days. Walk in faithfulness, and that faithfulness is going to produce fruitfulness in your life. Walk in fear, because that fear is going to produce favor in your life. And the truth is that true discipleship, true fellowship is expressed and demonstrated and cemented during all of those in-between moments. It's during the mundane moments when God really does His greatest work in you. So that's the encouragement this morning. Walk with Christ in the everyday, in the hard days. Walk in faithfulness, walk in fear. That's where the fruit comes. That's where the favor comes. Would you bow with me?